Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Things We Know. Today, we're tackling a conversation that feels urgent and necessary, but also for Kari and I, kind of joyful. We were talking about this before we got on. And that is, how do we raise boys to be the kind of men who are not threatened by inclusion, diversity, equity, but instead are confident, kind, and care about social justice?
Yeah, I mean, we're both, I shouldn't say we've raised four boys
Yes.
between us.
Yep.
Um, we've both had to look at the messages society gives them versus the values that we wanted to instill, right? And then as
Yep.
two privileged white women, which is what we are, we know we have a responsibility to raise boys with awareness of that privilege, without shame at all, without guilt, because they have nothing to, just with an understanding of how that works in the world and like their place in it all. And I do want to add, Lisa knows this, and a lot of people know this, sort of jokingly, but not really. About 8 years ago, I started thinking like I should do a podcast called Raising White Men, and and then I would joke like I don't know if I really want to take on who it might attract, but like,
Right.
I kind of wish I had. But I think the point is like we're not saying we're experts at all, and we're not even saying the great things we might share about our kids here are like we take all the credit in the world for it, because I think what we would both agree on is it takes a mindset and a community with the same mindset to help you do that. And it takes constantly battling stereotypes and typical norms to unpack that and get them to like really allow themselves to be modeled not just by their fathers but by their mothers too, and by the community around them. So
Yeah, and I think it, as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking, and this might be a weird analogy, but I also, as some of you know, have a daughter, and being in the diet industry for as many years as I did, I thought if I model for Charlotte, this is how you have a healthy relationship with food, she would just have that. And
right.
and she didn't, you know,
Okay.
and so we have to recognize that yes, modeling and comes from home, and they get out there and there's the manosphere and there's just there's other men or boys,
Media, there's
there's media,
yeah.
there's other influences. And so I mean, yes, actively we aren't raising our boys because they're older, but we're moms, we'll always have an influence on them. And so this is about a conversation around it takes a village. It's not just on it. There's so much that goes into helping a white boy, and by extension boys, right, understand that the feminine part of them is not weakness, that it's not that they are masculine and feminine just like we are masculine and feminine, and embracing
Right.
all of that is going to make them a kinder, better human.
Right. And um, without going down this other, path that we could, and we do all the time, and we will continue to. The context of this right now is so important because we know after the most recent election, we know that a lot of people who didn't necessarily feel super aligned with Trump did vote for Trump because they felt like boys were getting left behind in the messaging. And it's like
Right.
really like so I have talked to my kids about this, and I do it is true out there that sometimes people keep repeating this idea that like, oh, you won't get it, you're a white guy. And it's like, no, it's my job to always remind my kids like no opportunities were lost. The pools got expanded and included, and I think the messaging around that came in just really strong on that side. And I don't think we've done enough to talk about like what's true there. Without getting into all that, I do think that's part of why we're like we got to talk about this sooner than later, because it's an opportunity to understand that we want to raise all humans. We want to
Right.
raise all humans to understand that like there is no um, lack of power when we can share it, right? Like
Correct.
it isn't like if you get more, then I get less. And I think that is what has been out there in this manosphere, especially for white men and white young men, is like, oh, we can't let someone else have power. We'll lose it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And it's important because we have time to hopefully course correct before the next election and
Right.
bring call them in instead of what
Hmm.
appears to have felt like we've been calling them out. So, yeah, I mean, we've been thinking a lot about what experts say on this, and we're going to recommend a few books. But of course, there are many. These are just a few. But some of them that we've been reading are Raising White Kids by Jennifer Harvey and White Kids by Margaret Hagerman. Both look at how white children learn about race, often in subtle ways that reinforce privilege. Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, and I've just been like kind of going through this book, Better Boys, Better Men, the new masculinity that creates greater courage and emotional resiliency by Andrew Reiner. I think it's Reiner. It talks about how boys are taught to suppress emotions beyond anger. Because, like traditionally, what it explains is anger is the only emotion society tells men they can have, right? Like that's normal, that's masculine. And beyond that, it creates issues for them later in life because they feel like they have to suppress things. It makes them weak to have other emotions, or they just really don't have the words for the emotions.
Right.
And so it really made me think about how masculinity is shaped early on, especially because, like in my husband's family and mine, both with military fathers, there's and just Catholic upbringing too. There were a lot of socialized norms around how men could be, and we were just talking about this. My brother and I, how my dad would say, "Grit your teeth, grit your teeth. No son of mine's gonna cry." Like
Mm.
those kind of things. And although as he got older, my dad got really comfortable sharing and showing emotion and all of that. And I think my brother is pretty good at that. But it is something, even in a family like mine with my sweet gentle husband, he still is working on not suppressing emotions. And my boys, over their years of growing up, would express emotions but then sometimes doubt themselves around it. So it is a constant thing. So I've been absolutely loving this.
And the thing that strikes me as you're saying all of that is I want to acknowledge, at least in my world, and I think you and I think had this conversation before, what women don't know around this as well. Because yes, they're getting that message, right? But we probably did too growing up. We got the message that girls will be girls, boys will be boys. And I remember very distinctly the first time, and Liam was about in the seventh grade, and he just one day was crying. And I said,
Mm,
what are you crying about? And he said, I don't know. I'm just crying. And I remember, probably
mm,
much to his dismay, although he's not on Facebook, but I remember posting something about that and how many of my mom friends who had kids the same age, and again, and he was going through puberty. But we're not taught that boys go through puberty the way girls go through puberty and that their emotions ride a wave and all of that. And so I think there's an aspect too of like, as a mom, if you're not prepared for your sons to have emotion and you've grown up under that same patriarchal, misogynistic message that boys can't, they've got to be strong, they can't have feelings, anger is the only feeling that's valid. And of course, the opposite's true for us. We're not supposed to get angry. It might throw you, and your initial reaction might be like, well, buck up. If nothing's wrong, why are you crying? So
be a man
be a
is something
man.
that was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this book also really gets into that, like how by the time boys are adults, they're so disconnected often by their emotions, right? That they really struggle to even understand what's happening, and that leads to illness and stress and like
Yeah.
pain, physical pain. It can get really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think, IBS is something that is such a throwaway diagnosis. Liam struggles with it, and I lots of people do, and I do think it comes down to what are you not allowing in your life? What emotions are you holding in that is then causing your gut to not react correctly and so forth. Um, I like the part in Raising White Kids. So this is not just about boys, where, and I think we've all experienced this. So many white parents think they're doing right by their children when they say, we'll be colorblind, color doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And that actually just reinforces privilege instead of challenging it. There,
Mhm.
people are different races, people are different colors, and to pretend like you're colorblind does no one any good.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing that we want to highlight from another book that I didn't fully read through, I've only dabbled in it, but I do want to go back and read it fully. White Kids was showing that even in well-intentioned progressive families, kids often internalize the idea that success is all about individual effort rather than
Mm,
recognizing that there's systemic advantages, right? So I think all these come together, right? There's the you shouldn't show emotions. There's the like if you show vulnerability, you're weak. There's this, idea that like to be good parents, we're going to teach them that everyone's the same. And then there's
right.
this lack of recognition that you have some advantages you might not realize. And gosh, we heard this so much in our own journey around all this. People like we coil right now. There's a whole just effort to get rid of all that. We have an episode about that. And this idea that there's privilege when people have had really hard lives. And it's like, doesn't mean you haven't had a hard life, doesn't mean you're rich,
Right.
doesn't mean that bad things haven't happened to you. What you don't realize is that you have less barriers to the things you want to even go for, to even get out of a hard situation. You have less barriers to even getting help. And that is just looking at history and how things were set up. And so, very well-intentioned parents, and I'm sure I have some of this in me because it came to me too, was just like, work hard and you'll get, you'll
Yep.
create what you want for yourself. And I think that it's often an overlooked conversation that even the best intentioned parents,
Yeah.
are not having. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about what it looks like to raise a boy who isn't threatened by feminism, who understands that feminism is not a woman thing. They're not threatened by diversity or inclusion. And it is. Confidence is a big part of this. When boys feel secure on who they are, they don't need to dominate or diminish others. I mean, on the face of it, that feels like a big,
All
because
right. I
confident
was just saying,
people, right? Confident people don't feel the need to belittle others, and yet it can be very subtle.
yeah. I mean, it all starts with emotional intelligence, which is like what adults are still working on, right?
Yes, for sure.
Like this book also makes that case that men who are emotionally aware, who have achieved even the beginnings of social emotional intelligence, and this is true for women too,
Yeah.
you lead a fuller, happier life, right? But they have to be taught that emotions are brave and they're a strength and they're valid, not a weakness. Otherwise, they're going to constantly be like trying to hide part of themselves instead of being confident in all parts of themselves, even the messy parts.
Yeah, and I don't think we should underestimate how important it is to constantly be reinforcing that. Because again, you could have started this when they were younger, letting them cry, letting them have their emotions, talking them through this. It does remind me, and I know I've told you this story before. I luckily got my coaching certification as Liam was in his early teens. And he at one point asked me to only speak to him in my coaching voice. And what
Mm-hmm.
he that's how he called it, but what he was really saying is ask me questions. Let me be seen and heard versus telling me what to do. And I have not that will if I never coach another person in my entire life, that will have been worth the price of admission to getting my coaching
Totally.
certification. No question. I know you've
That's
had that
true.
experience as well. So
I've said that. Yeah. Yeah.
again, I'm saying this from this doesn't end when your kids leave the house. This is a constant learning for any of us who are white, that we have to be
Mm-hmm.
constantly reminding ourselves around confidence and emotions are valid. They're not weaknesses, because we
Yeah.
are being bombarded with just exactly the opposite information. Um,
Well, yeah. I'm sorry. Did I cut
no,
you
no,
off?
no, nope. Go ahead.
All right. I mean, the thing about this is this whole idea of feeling threatened by feminism is such a misunderstanding. Like you
Yeah.
said, anything that includes someone else doesn't mean it wants you excluded. And 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 it seems laughable to us because we know it, but it's such an interesting phenomenon that catches on in the podcast sphere or out in the world, like this idea. Like I've never, and I have worked with some of the most impressive outspoken feminists out there, I've never ever gotten the idea that people want to get rid of men.
No.
Just want to be at the same table with the same airtime, with the same pay, with the same benefits, right? And there are some really impressive companies out there that are finding that their whole base does better. It took longer because they really had to do like a deep dive into their culture to not just create the positions, but create the culture that helps it thrive.
Yeah.
The change point, like the time it takes to go through that change can be messy. And that has been captured as this is a failure and we're like losing quality and we got to go, back to meritocracy and like, but that's coming from this threatened place. Like you feel
Yes.
threatened that you didn't. And in so many cases, you're going to find, where someone doesn't feel like it's fair. And but overall, if you really, really understand it, it is about being secure enough. And that's the whole point of this, right? Like all humans, like if everybody did a better job of like taking care of the hurts inside and really getting the support they needed and felt safe enough to be vulnerable to really work on it, they're not going to feel the need to prevent other people from having what they have.
Right.
And that's just that goes beyond even this topic. But it's so true. Like, same with like a small nation that wants to take over the one next to them is not going to do that if they feel like they have enough. So it
Correct.
really does cause you to look inward first and go, what do I need that I feel so threatened by someone else having it?
Yes. Oh my God. Snaps to that for sure. And so a lot of this does come from home, right? Parroting Forward by Cindy Wang Brandt talks about how justice starts at home, that kids pick up on who we value, who we make space for, and who we don't, quite frankly. So if we want
Mm,
our boys to respect women, to respect LGBTQ, to respect BIPOC, we need to be modeling that respect. One of
mm,
the first books I bought when I found out I was pregnant was a little ABC book by Keith Haring. Keith Haring is huge in my life, has been forever, and really was a big part of why somebody asked me recently why I'm such an ally, and I'm like, I don't know, I just always have been, but loving Keith Haring was one of the reasons I am such an ally. And I just thought, I want from the minute my first child pops out, I want them to see that we are allies in this house. And
mm.
it stuck.
That's so sweet. I love that. I I think even too, like justice starting at home, even if you don't have the most progressive beliefs,
Yes.
really also invites you to allow. If
Mm,
you don't feel like there's this idea, I think I just posted something about this, like, well, why should I accept things that go against my beliefs? No one's asking you to. No one's asking you to. Can you allow it?
right.
Otherwise, you're trying to control the behavior and the identity and the humanity of others or
Yep.
deny the humanity of others. So, what if, regardless of what beliefs you have at home, if you're wanting to raise good men, what if you like at least teach them to allow people to be different, allow
Yeah.
people to live their lives? And I think like we don't say that enough. We don't even try to like, it's like, okay, maybe don't, if you don't accept, that's on you and your belief system, but
Yeah.
allow.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say we are a progressive household and we also don't try to change people who are conservative. Like I
Hmm.
would
You're
never
allowing
ever,
it.
I'm allowing you, I always joke, I'm pro-choice, which means you get to
Mm.
choose however you're going to live your life, whether I agree with it or not. I've never comprehended the idea of my way or the highway. I cannot wrap my brain around that.
That's why when people talk about like the gay agenda, I love that meme. It's like, when's the last time some queens came to your door preaching the good news of Elton John?
Right?
I mean, there is no agenda. Nobody's trying to change you. And if you or your child isn't comfortable, you get to, I mean, I don't even know if you're listening to us if that's the case, but if you or your child isn't comfortable, you get to say that's how they feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and leave it at that. Like that's the very least, I think. But
And if there are
you
some
know,
queens that are doing that, I would like to put my address on that.
oh no,
I would like
please come
somebody to
in.
come, please preach the gospel of Elton John to me.
That's hilarious. So I think like what we're talking about is understanding kindness and tolerance and respect and equity. None of these things threaten masculinity. If nothing else, they're actually strengths because it is if what and I don't know if we'll get into this. I don't know if I even put this in the notes, but like patriarchy um, does sometimes create the need for good guys to have bad guys, right? So they
Sure.
can look like good
Yep.
guys. So this idea, and it's kind of making me gag, this idea like we need to protect women, like from who? You? But like,
Yeah.
but if there is this like primal need to feel protective, the most protective thing you can be is safe.
Yeah.
And like be protective in that like you're protecting the space and the air in the room. Be a safe, kind, tolerant person. That puts people's nervous systems at ease. So
Yeah, I mean, I know we're talking about raising white men, but I mean, there's so much of this that I want to extrapolate out to raising good humans, right? Because
right.
kindness, respect, equity are not threats to your personhood either,
Mm-mm.
unless you decide that's the story you're telling.
Right.
It makes you a better human to respect and be inclusive and be compassionate. So yes, we have a crisis, I believe, right now with white men and white boys. That's my personal view. But if you do not have a, if you are not raising a white boy, replace the word boy and put in human, put in person,
Mm.
because all of these things also work towards your, the amount of women that won't call themselves feminists, the amount of women that don't identify as that, it just, again, that's a whole nother pod. We haven't said that in
And
a
the
while.
thing here too is like, yeah, the thing too is I really feel like there is no like if someone were to hear an idea like this and say, oh, well, they're getting overlooked, there's no proof of that.
Right.
75% of, the positions that require a master's degree are held by men and white men, where it's really like a hugely opposite percentage of women, including women of color, who have master's degrees, that they don't get those positions. So, and
Mm,
that's just like that's just one little slice. We can share some of those statistics on our social medias when this comes out, because facts are really important to us. But
yes.
the idea, it's just question when you have a feeling like you're being attacked, or you're being threatened, or you're being left out. Question that, and like that's not a good feeling, and I'm sorry you feel that way. But
Yeah.
also, like maybe go find out if that's true, because it also doesn't mean you're the bad guy and that you should be left out. Nobody is saying that. Like if you work hard and you apply for something, you should be considered just like everyone else. So I do think this gets really touchy because of certain things that have happened to people along the way, and I think you got to look at what's true before you believe that, because if you believe it, then you're victimizing yourself and you're not making anything better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you and I talk a lot about community and how important that is. And, unfortunately, the reality as it stands right now is women join in community a lot easier. It's expected that women will be in community. Boys and men do not have that. Luxury is the wrong word. They just don't tend to do it, right? So research shows that boys tend to lose deep friendships as they grow up because a deep friendship does often require vulnerability and authenticity. And again, that's not considered masculine.
Yeah, right. I mean, and this same book, this Better Men, Better Boys, Better Men, Andrew Reiner, he drives that point home because I think I knew this by observation, especially with Gen X men. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
Um, I have beginning to realize when men don't have strong friendships, they end up relying on the romantic partners to meet all their needs, which isn't healthy. And it causes a huge imbalance at home. It's like, I want to be with my friends, but I feel bad. Could we make some friends? You know? My husband does have great friends, but like his proclivity to like make plans happen isn't there, right?
Yeah.
But then
Yep.
when
Yep.
he
Yep.
does, oh, that was great, like a couple trips a year or like a night out or something, but he like really doesn't like it's not like a norm where it is
Right.
like oxygen for me. So I've
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I just knowing we were recording this episode, I came across and I sent it to you. A gentleman, his name's on Instagram, it's B Rucker. I don't Berecker, and I will in fact put this up the week that it comes out. He talks about an epidemic of male loneliness, and that again, men really struggle with vulnerability, and especially in evangelical spaces. He comes from that background, and he talks about how when they're talking about ministering to men, they talk about you've got to go out and do it in spaces where they're already doing something like sports. And I think we talked about this in the Gen X. There was that great Wrexham, Welcome to Wrexham episode where the woman talked about the thing men missed during COVID was being able to go to sports with their dads or with their friends. And it's, and what he says in this piece around evangelical men is that that's not even talked about. Like, okay, so men aren't typically vulnerable and don't normally talk. So how can we make this happen? Like, it is absolutely dismissed as not a skill set men should have. And so it's constantly, and there's no problem with going and sharing sports with somebody. I mean, you and I like to share a glass of wine, so I get it, right? But what he says, and I love this, I actually wrote it down. When we don't, being vulnerable is part of your humanity. So when we don't allow men to do that, we trap them in small boxes that do not see their full humanity. So when we
Mm.
reinforce that, we being the general we, right? Um, but I guess we need to remember that they are putting themselves in these boxes. It's being reinforced that it's okay. And so it takes a little bit more work to bring them out, and we had the episode on building friendships as adults is hard. Probably,
Hmm.
I'm going to guess based on all this information, it's even harder for men. And so those same conversations that we had around building relationships as adult is true here. What are uh, the little consistent acts of connection that you could have that might open up to be a bigger connection?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me so many things right at the same time. Like I'm thinking about my boys and their friend groups, and they have really dear friend groups, and yet we will still have conversations pretty regularly. Like who would like? Do you have at least one person you can talk to about anything or about like the
Mm,
hard stuff or the sad stuff? And like they'll sometimes with a little bit of grief. Like I can't really talk to like I have so much fun. He's always there for me, but he's not my person to talk to about anything I'm kind of questioning. But this guy is, like or
yeah.
this person is and but like also acknowledging like get different things out of different connections, and some people are like you're going out to live music friends or you're partying friends or you're like we talk about politics and stuff from our classes, and to have at least one person that you can just go having a bad day and oh, like how's that going with you and what's going on with Griffin and those kind of things. So I I'm glad that we just have that conversation going because every once in a while they have to kind of realize, oh, I do have that person, but I haven't brought it to them in a while, and that would be helpful, right?
Yeah, that's good that you keep having
Um,
those.
when we have a friend who's, health and marriage were going through a lot, and he realized he hadn't really didn't even have like any of the male friends numbers in his phone,
Wow.
and he thought that was normal, and we were like, that's not, you could actually make an effort, and so he did, and he reached out to a group, and two people, including Brendan, got back and said, yeah, and the invitation was, I want to have something more intentional like our wives do, like where we actually talk about stuff that we're working on or worried about or get together. And then they did, you know, for a while. He moved away briefly, but get together pretty regularly to, you know, have some more intentional conversation and actually find out what's going on with each other. And you know, I mean, not that's not everybody's cup of tea. That sounds really scary for some, actually women too. Like there's just certain
Yeah.
personalities that are like, yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Peace out.
Like that can happen, but I don't want to agree to it. And
I'll be there if I
I
want.
get that. Yeah, the perfect
Well,
time. But yeah.
I'm just curious. I'm asking you this question. You may not know the answer, but what strikes me there is, could there also be, if we're saying, and again, this comes from a book called The Six Conversations, that friendships are built through small, consistent acts of connection. I don't think we have to go 0 to 60 between sports conversations, right? Going out to a game and having a couple of beers to let's go have a retreat with Lisa and Kari, right? Like it doesn't have to be 0 to 60. And so once again, I wonder, what strikes me is I wonder if you're listening to this, if you share it with your husband, if you think about it for your boys, asking them to acknowledge, and it sounds like this is exactly what you're saying, right? Asking them to remember, who do they already have those kind of connections with, and either strengthening them or utilizing them. And if you realize you already do this on some level, it makes it easier to maybe make more connections like that. If you think to yourself, well, all I do is go see sports with my friends, I'm not going to have these conversations, that cuts off possibility.
Yeah, two things that makes me think of. One is, well, actually three, because sometimes it's friends that are female, but
True,
that
true.
they have that with. But one just makes me think of it, same thing with parenting and having a close connection with your kid. Quantity is, you can control quantity way more than you can control quality. You can't
Yes.
plan a really quality time with your child, especially when they're a teenager. Take it from us, and ensure that you're going to have quality. Like they're in
Right,
charge of the
right.
windows. You are
Yep.
not. But if you are committed to quantity without expectation, you are going to create windows where that happens. That's the same thing, like you're saying, those consistent connections. If you're in a pickleball league or a basketball league or a bowling league, or I don't know why I'm making it all sporty. If you're in like a trivia night thing that you go to, maybe not that because there's a lot of extra, but like if there's just something that you do regularly with people, you are going to create the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last thing I was just going to say about that is you just need one, like you just
Yeah.
need one. And the barrier to that often that my kids do talk about is the phones. Like the phones are
Mm.
kind of a barrier to intimacy, and it's a little difficult and awkward, and people are used to kind of hiding in distraction. So, that is an interesting thing. Like if you're on a hike with somebody, and to have the courage to say, let's leave our phones behind, or, maybe you
Mm.
shouldn't because maybe you need it for navigating a path. I don't know. But, to have like the gumption to do that might create that more. But I'm going to guess if you're like on a walk, you're not staring at your phone anyway.
True. All right, so let's talk about some practical strategies for all of this. How do
Yes. And
we,
this goes back to the parenting part, right?
yeah, totally. So how if we
Again,
want to raise boys who are inclusive, confident, kind, equitable, understand what feminism is, what are some things that as parents we can do to help raise that?
well, I mean, I'm going to respond to that with, it's not a do, it's a be. I mean, if you're somebody
Mm,
who's working on that, and that's
true.
what you stand for, and it's the communities you take part in, and the things you don't even have to do anything other than, who you are and how you spend your time and what's important to you is going to be part of the nurture piece of parenting, right? So I grew up with parents who were so they were the kind of they were my dad is not around anymore, my mom, the kind of Catholics that were really of service, right? Like constantly involved in the community, and not in a white knight kind of way at all, like a very subtle, like my grandparents, and they got it from, like my dad's dad. He had to have a heart attack for us to even realize what he was doing for so many people in the community. Like we had no
Mm,
idea that he wasn't showing up to give this person a ride or drop off groceries for this person or that. So like who you are and how you treat people has a lot to do with it. So you could want this for them, but you kind of got to look at like how are you operating, and maybe they don't see that. Maybe be a little bit more open about how you're spending your time and what you care about. So I think that that's more effective than doing something.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, modeling what best practices as being a human is definitely important. And then there's a little bit more difficult conversation, which is actually having conversations around race, gender, privilege. Um, Liam and I just had this conversation over Christmas, and it's one of those things when you think your kids aren't paying attention, they absolutely fucking are. So,
Oh, so
flashback
true.
to I mean, we lived in LA. I'm thinking it was during COVID, and I'm pretty sure it happened after George Floyd. And again, my kids have gone to marches with me as since they've been able to march, and even when I was carrying them on my back. So this was all the modeling part was all there. However, Liam walked one day to get to CVS to get some snacks, and he bought chips and dip. And as he was getting closer to our house, the bag broke and the glass of French onion dip fell and broke all over the sidewalk. Liam was going to, he was literally in front of our apartment building. So he was going to go in and get napkins and a bag to come out so that he wouldn't cut his hand. Unfortunately, a cop saw this happen. And so immediately pulls over and gets out and what I would consider not at all helpful, says, "You got to clean that up. Why aren't you cleaning?" And Liam's like, I am. I'm going to go in and get stuff. No, you pick that up right now. You clean that up right now. And Liam's like, but if I pick it up with my bare hands, I might cut myself. He's like, pick it up. And he's like, "Ah." So he does. He picks it all up. He comes in and tells me this story, and I about lost my fucking mind because I was like, dude, do you understand that had you been a kid of color, that could have gone way fucking worse. And Liam
Mm-hmm.
was in his moment where he was just very against authority and he's like, but blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, 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 I hear you. That was not handled appropriately. That guy was pulling his power move. But do you realize what privilege you just showed by talking back to that cop? And he bitched and moaned and we actually got in quite a fight about it because it was one of those moments where like I was literally seeing red. Just at Christmas, Liam said, I think back to that conversation and that moment, and I was such an asshole. And you were so right. That was privilege at its highest level. And I was just like, tear. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many conversations Liam and we've rehashed over the years. He had not brought that one up to me since it happened. So again, that was not an easy conversation to have. I actually, at the risk of sounding too woo, I actually had to do some like energetic healing around that because I was livid and it was living with me because all of a sudden I thought, here I have modeled for you all these years your privilege. I thought you were with me on this. And then you fucking argue with
Mm-hmm.
me on this? I mean, I was
Mm.
furious. And and
Yeah.
it was not a fun conversation to have and it landed. It just I didn't know it till 5 years later.
Well, what's interesting here is like also understanding boy brains and how, like we
Mm,
used to have that the thing I repeated to my kids that my friend told me, and I forget where it comes from, but it's like one boy, one brain, two boys, half a brain, three boys, no brain.
yes.
So there is some just really biological stuff that happens with, a typical boy where like that didn't occur to them. Like it's not
Correct.
that they thought they so like we had a really similar thing, Peter. God, it's just ridiculous how he had like never been in trouble in school, and then like a stupid thing with a plastic toy
Oh,
weapon
yes.
got him in a lot of trouble, and it didn't even occur to him
Right.
that like like why that was wrong, and he was you know like a student and class president. Like he had leader, he wasn't dumb yet. It's like,
Yeah.
how did that never occur to you? And then like, all the afterwards, like, wow, like it took him a while. It was much later when he went to write college essays where he really wrote about how that could have gone very different,
Yeah.
for a person of color, and how ridiculous it is that it didn't occur to him, but like he had to come to it. And I, just like you, the same, I was like, how could you not know? And I think sometimes like you really have to walk through it and really look at it from all angles, and that just comes with time. So it's never going to be one moment is never going to define someone's parenting or someone's character. It's like how we learn from it and go forward is, and this goes into kind of also what I wanted to say was, I think that and this was very true when we were growing up, and I'm sure there's some version of it too. Like there's this cultural thing that like, you're weak if you're like, you have to be right and you have to do things well and you have to be the
Mm,
man. Like you have to know things, but like to actually say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or like, or I messed up, I screwed up, like this was my responsibility. To take responsibility, to admit you don't know something, that is actually some of the like most mature, healthy, development that any brain can show. And that takes time, right? But it has to be modeled. And if you can model it, then you don't think like, oh, being the man means getting everything right. It means like actually being transparent.
yeah.
And I think those things kind of get folded into that. Like, I'm supposed to know everything. I'm supposed to get this right. And if you are aware of privilege, then you sometimes can put too much pressure on yourself and then like, fuck yourself over that way. So it's like,
Right.
there's a lot of just like really being human that is way more masculine or feminine than people realize.
Yeah. And thinking about that same story, like much to Darren's dismay, Liam is a bit of a hothead as I am. And so I'm sure that escalated very quickly into yelling. I'm certain of it. But you have to allow boys and men to give them the space to express their emotions. They might not want to talk about it right in that minute. Decoding Boys by Cara Natterson talks about how adolescent boys want to talk, but they need different entry points, like during car rides, while doing an activity, as we already talked about, through humor. I still have men that have to do it that way. But that's the funny thing about Liam is that Liam has always been a talker. I've never needed entry points. He has always gotten in the car and just like bleh, said everything, or when he comes to visit. But where I see that spaciousness was, even though we did not come to in my mind at the time, an acceptable conclusion to that conversation, he did sit with it. It didn't just dissipate out of his brain. He had the space over the years that allowed him to come to his own conclusion of like, you're right. I was really lucky that I was a white boy in that moment. So giving them the
Absolutely.
space to have the conversations on their on their time, I guess, maybe dime is the wrong word, at their pace, and allowing them to know that they can talk whenever they want to talk.
Mm,
Do you have a
yeah.
fourth one?
Yeah. I was just thinking that was kind of sitting with me. I I think this goes back to connections, but
Yeah.
encouraging friendships that are deep and diverse. Just model it, you encourage it, make room for it, make time for it. Sometimes parents who are so under pressure to help, like all these well-intentioned parents who want their kids to have access to every opportunity, keep their kids really busy.
Yes.
And this accomplishing thing, this like race to get all those things for their college applications or their resumes and stuff, I don't think they've ever realized how much that competes with the opportunity to get to know themselves, get to know
Yeah.
others, learn, go deeply on, spark creativity, right?
Yeah.
um that's a tough thing, but I mean, that's something you might have some unique things to share about, because you have artist kids. They need space, that needs oxygen.
Yeah.
That doesn't need like overly scheduled. friendships shape our identity. And so if we encourage boys to cultivate meaningful connections with a variety of people, and that includes letting them go out in the world and get a job somewhere where they're around people they've never been exposed to, right? That was
Oh,
huge for me. That was a huge education for me. They're going to carry that openness into adulthood. Peter learned so much at a restaurant that he was working at from these cooks, these guys in their like late 30s who kept saying, this sounds like I'm bringing this up to give myself a compliment. Like, tell your parents they're doing a really good job, and then we're helping them do a good job by saying, like, yeah, we had a lot of fun, but we did a lot of drugs, and you do not, want to be going paycheck to paycheck in your late 30s. So listen to your parents. Like they would say stuff like that. But he also learned a ton of cool things about like music and entrepreneurship and different perspectives from that, like more than he could have learned from me or any school or any class. He learned about life in those experiences, and to be around people who kind of talked about their journey and admitted what they would do differently.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's a really good point. Again, Liam and I were having this conversation when he was home because currently Charlotte is working on campus. And he was like, I really hope she gets a summer job because it's so different to be at a job versus a campus job. And she will. I feel really lucky that the kids grew up in Chicago and LA in the city, so they have always been around diverse uh what do I want to say, people. I was going to say a
Yes.
different word that's gone out of my brain. Populations. Thank you. Thank you myself. I
Mm.
just I just thanked myself for remembering a word. They've always been around diverse populations. And what I love about what you're saying is it's not just about diverse people of the same age, but diverse people of other ages, of other, that's again, not to go back to DEI, but that's what diversity means. It's diversity
Well,
of thought too, not
it's a
just
type
of
of
color.
mentorship. It's a type
Yes.
of
Yep.
mentorship to and yeah, I mean, honestly, the school my kids went to, the K through 8, there
So
was
impactful for them.
a huge like and like the whole mission of like the three tenets of character, creativity, and intellect, right? It wasn't
Mm,
just what you learned, it's how you treat people, it's how you understand, all the tools and opportunities that you have and how to like plug them in and make them work, intersectionally.
yeah.
And but also just allow them to be kids longer, and like they're really into play and creativity and nature and all that stuff. I do think, like my son said, I've never met anyone from there, Arbor, who's an asshole. And it's
That's
not that
huge.
it wasn't mostly privileged people. It's not that.
Right.
It's that way that teachers and other mentors and other people in his life would say, you seem to be pretty sure about that idea. I would look deeper at that. Like
Ooh,
they
that's
didn't
good.
give him the answer, right? They didn't give him the answer. They were like, look deeper at that. And they studied other cultures and journeys and migrations and, the oldest stories like Gilgamesh and the Odyssey and the Iliad, and then talk about how they're at play today, and like what that feels like. So like they really had to learn how to think things through from another perspective. And I wish that was part of, my, like I wish it was part of the way
Yeah.
I grew up. But
Yeah.
and I will say, like the way I grew up, I definitely was raised by people who were like, you're no better than anybody, like you've got to work hard and make your own things happen. And yet, of course I had privilege. But I really do think that message is, it's not just enough to have that message. It's really great when your parents, and as mine did, surround you with people who reinforce it.
Yeah. Love it. Well, should we move on to the song?
Sure.
I'm super excited because I'm getting to see Jason Isbell in March, and I think this comes out before, so
Nice.
I know I'm so psyched. So we picked, might feel a little on the nose, but you know what? We picked "White Man's World" by Jason Isbell. Um, this is just this.
Yeah.
I actually found this song when we were around pre-Roe getting demolished, and I was going to a reproductive rights march, and I think we all were in our different cities. And so I put together a little playlist, and this is where I found this song. I'll just read a few of the lyrics, but these are important. I'm a white man living on a white man's street. I've got the bones of the red man under my feet. The highway runs through their burial grounds, past the oceans of cotton. I'm a white man looking in a black man's eyes, wishing I'd never been one of the guys. We pretended not to hear another white man's joke. Oh, the times ain't forgotten. That
Mm.
song, oh, so good, so good.
I have such a wish that people could have these conversations and hear these things and not feel um
Attacked.
like, yeah, not feel attacked and not feel bad. It's not about that. I think the more
No.
we are aware of everyone's experience, the more we can all move forward together. And that's the saddest part is, removing so much of this stuff because it makes you uncomfortable to hear it and makes you feel like a bad guy. Like, I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry that that's your experience. And that's not at all like the best way for us to move forward is for
Yeah.
people to feel like they're responsible for it. It's awareness that, everybody doesn't have the same experience.
Absolutely. No, I feel you 100%. Like when I look at the loss of DEI, not only is it horrifying, but it does strike a sadness chord in me that the people who are so against this, A, don't know what it is, don't actually know. They're just listening to incorrect information. And that they feel so bad about themselves, and they don't know this, right? I don't think, but there's something in them that is lacking, that they think, if I am equitable, that means I lose. And I just, that makes me sad. So I hear you
Yeah.
100%.
And and also it's interesting because we can only pack so much into one episode, but didn't really get into all the, like bad guy, good guy kind of stuff. But like if you're somebody whose response to someone talking about statistics of, you know, rape or sexual assault or something, and your response is not all men,
Mm,
you're defending men instead of showing empathy and awareness and compassion, instead of saying, that really sucks. I'm so sorry that that's the case. You're not saying you're responsible for it, but you're showing no compassion. And that's where I think some of this comes from, is they constantly feel like they have to apologize or something. I have no idea. But I think this is a really important thing for us to keep talking about, is there is a way that you can acknowledge and be part of the solution and change the conversation going forward. Like, yeah, what can we do to make this better? Like, how do we make this safer? This needs to be safer. And it also, and I don't know if this is related, I'm gonna like say this out loud and it might not make sense, but we always talk about like statistics in terms of how many women got raped instead of saying there was this many rapists, right? Like, so
right.
maybe we could refer to it like in the actual act, they could see themselves as different, because we're not talking about men, we're talking about criminals in that case, or we're talking about,
Correct. Yeah.
people committing, hate crimes, and that in that. So it's like if we could change the way where it's not always like poor women got themselves victimized. Like, no, there's some bad acts that we can change the narrative on, and be better men, better humans, better communities around. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that
No, no,
just
no,
feels like
you're
it
right.
needed to
No,
be said.
yes, instead of, because perhaps looking at it from the crime versus the person, right? You're right. I mean, the
Mhm.
sort of all lives matter, not all white men, all that crap diminishes the actual crime that is happening, you know.
And I know you and I both know so many wonderful, wonderful men who happen to be white. So it's like we shouldn't need to have to say that. Like, let's move on and talk through like how to be inclusive, like how everybody
Yes,
wins. And winning meaning like feels like their humanity matters as much as anyone's.
absolutely. Yeah. And so again, raising good men, any color, but for us, it's white men, doesn't happen by accident. It does take real effort. It takes intentional conversations. It takes a willingness to have tough conversations and to challenge outdated ideas about masculinity. This doesn't happen just magically.
Right. Yeah. And like I've said many times, we're not saying we're experts at this. This is a constant conversation we're in, and we're also married to really great guys who have
No
helped
question.
form and shape the and that our sons have become. So this is not us going, listen to us. It's just saying, let's have a conversation and stay aware about it. The good news is it is very possible we can continue to nurture boys who are confident without being controlling, successful without being entitled, strong without being aggressive. And when we do, we're going to make the world a better place for everyone.
No question. So if this conversation resonated with you, share it with another parent, with a mentor or a teacher. Let's keep raising boys that know that kindness, inclusion, compassion, justice are strengths. They are not weaknesses. They are the measure of a man, not the, I don't even know what the word is. Like that is the measure of a man. Kindness, compassion, equality, justice. Oh, what a world. Thanks everyone for listening.
Amazing.
We'll be back next week.
Bye. Thank